next artist, Erica Reed-Lee. Erica Reed-Lee makes painting, objects, and installations. Her work explores perception, control, and the shifting boundaries between self and other, public and private, and objectivity and subjectivity. In conjunction with her art practice, Lee has curated several exhibitions, including Book Arts of Houston at the Printing Museum in 2023, and Gathering What's Tangible with Open MFA at Flatland Gallery in 2022. Lee has received multiple grants from the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance and was awarded the Kimbrough Artist Award from the Dallas Museum of Art. Lee received her Bachelor of Science from the University of Texas at Austin, studied at the New York Studio School, and completed the block program at the Glassell Studio School. She will graduate with an MFA in painting this spring. Erica.
Thank you. So, thank you for being here, and I'm sure I'm going to forget a few things I wanted to discuss, but I will try my best to remember everything. It's actually something that is a through line through at least these works. And you'll notice that my work is divided between down here and upstairs, and I'll touch briefly on the work upstairs as well before we head up there for the next artist talk. But about books. So if you can't notice quite, these are actually in relation to the book. This is a sketchbook that has been disassembled and installed onto the wall. And I have been really interested in books for multitude of reasons, which is why I curated that show, Book Arts of Houston, back in 2023. And books are these very tactile means of holding on to memories and recording history and being something that holds a narrative and meaning. I've always found that very desirable, as I've tried to have a very logical order to my life. And so I've often come to books with this desire to both be very objective, but then subjective with my self-expression, or with learning about other people's personal experiences. So the only issue with book arts, or one of the main things, is that it's a very typically intimate experience that's very personal and one-on-one. And I love that it's very tactile and intimate. However, I wanted it to get onto the wall, and I wanted it to act more like a painting. And so how to do that? Initially, I was taking pages apart and putting them on panel, and trying out a few different methods like that. And that still isn't quite working. And so I found that sewing the individual works onto the wall to be a really great way of retaining the materiality of the sketchbook page. So it still keeps that memory of what it initially was. So, what else would I like to say? The process of making a sketchbook and then disassembling it is something I've found very enticing as well. So all of my sketchbooks I like to make myself by buying them, choosing the paper that fits best for me and maybe is reflective of whatever I assume is going to be coming up in the time period ahead of me. And so that is why you see a variety of papers within a single sketchbook. What else would I like to say? I've chosen to, while I like what books do in terms of keeping it somewhat sequential, temporal recording, I've chosen to mix things up, certainly throughout the sketchbook, both in the process of making it and displaying it. And so when I was drawing day to day, I was jumping around the sketchbook to choosing whichever paper made sense to me that day, whether I was drawing or writing. And then when I came to installing the work, I chose to make it work more aesthetically and mixing it up. This, I believe, works well in terms of how memory works, in that we don't work or think very much chronologically. Things come back that are farther away in time, and they come close to us. And then we jump around, things layer on top of one another. And so I like to retain that in the installation. What else? So in terms of sewing onto the wall, I've chosen specifically to, the sewing involves a very simple process. Initially I was using a sewing needle or a curved needle to literally sew into the wall, but that process actually turned out to be very fickle and did not work much of the time. And so I worked with a friend who's in archiving, and he recommended this other process where I literally glue the thread into the wall and then sew each of the papers as well. What's really fun about, or not just fun, but interesting to think about with the installation in this way is that it integrates with the space that I choose. So wherever I've chosen to install these works, it involves the wall as well as the larger building or institution that it's inside of. So in this case, it's Flatland and the University of Houston. And one of the things I found very useful in the book format is that it's this unmediated, unedited space where one can truly work out ideas and oneself. And so to have the ability to put that directly onto the wall in an institution is a very powerful thing. And I think often about the book being counter to what our digital experiences are so often. And while these are very, many of these are like personal experiences, dates and times of talking sometimes about my daughter or something I ate. And those are very personal, but why would we share those things on platforms online that we don't own, and we wouldn't share them in a controlled environment that we have more authorship over? And so that is what I really find invigorating or empowering about sewing directly onto the wall, these more diaristic experiences. What else do I want to say about this? I also think that it's a fun way of relating to craft, since it is, and it keeps this rollability piece to it because it's a sewn piece. It's threadwork, it's a delicate process, and like I said before, it's the images or the writing might be vulnerable, but also the pieces themselves are just held up with thread. There's no nails or something piercing like that. And while work could be removed, it has that possibility of still having its memory on the wall. So whether or not a page is taken down, its history is there just by the space it leaves, as well as the thread. And I think of this work being in conversation with a few different artists I've really come to enjoy. Lydia Clark and her Beakless, which are interactive and haptic works. Lee Lozano's dialogue piece, which is a very diaristic recording in notebook pages. Ankawar's dates, which are keep time as a subject. And Alison Noble's big book, which makes the book itself an immersive object and installation. Upstairs, you will find some very different work of mine in terms of appearance, but it still has something to do with this work, in that I'm thinking about self-surveillance and where placing myself within this world that we find ourselves in, which is constantly surveilled, controlled, and becoming increasingly placeless. So that's the subject matter, and then the material really comes into focus. Instead of being pages, it becomes about the canvas and the paint, and becoming very tactile in its manner. So you'll see a few different presentation methods, as well as editing in terms of using the thread and editing or redaction by way of thread and paint. And the most simplest means using just black paint and the canvas. And I think that is all I would like to say for now, but I'm happy to keep going anyway.
Thank you, Erica. So, first of all, I also have questions for you. So you talked about kind of like your relationship to books and how that is an intimate medium for you, and also that you mentioned there are diaristic entries and experiences that are recorded. recorded on these pages. So I was also wondering, how do you see your relationship with the viewer through your work?
Yeah, I keep it very intimate. It's an invitation for the viewer to be participating in this work. Like I invite viewers to literally touch the work, and so I'm trying to be playful with the viewer and to engage them to be physically present and move around it. Yeah.
So when you get the chance, it might be nice to walk around the piece. Do we have any audience questions for Erica? Yes.
How do you know when it's finished?
So for these works, these are everyday drawings and writings. The sketchbook is done when the sketchbook is nearly some of the pages are empty, but it's usually a time issue. So I'll make a sketchbook for a specific period of time. In this case, I started in October and did it just a couple days before the show. But in previous works, I've had them related to the summer or when I was pregnant with my daughter. So it usually has a specific period, and then whatever happens within that time is the end.
I have another question for you. I'm really interested in some of the pages that are empty. So I was wondering why you didn't fill out all the pages, or why are they blank in some instances?
So some of the blank pages are because of the jumping around nature of how I work. And then it's also an opportunity for a bit of pause and just looking at the paper as a form. So that goes back to the materiality of the sketchbook and just enjoying that.
Mm-hmm. I like that we can also see your relationship to the sketchbook and how you use it before it's installed onto the wall for everybody and displayed like a painting. Yes.
Is there a relationship to how the pages are put on the wall? So are they in order, or did you place things next to each other because you felt it could communicate to maybe another page over here, or how did you go about placing them?
So they're fairly mixed up. I chose the order based on more of once they start being on the wall and having some conversations between the pieces. So they don't necessarily go in order, but there might be a repetition or a conversation that happens. So in the right corner, I have some images relating to the installation here, and so I wanted those to be somewhat near one another. And then I also put some of the pages related to the actual form of the book and how it was constructed on either end to kind of start and end the work, so and also closer to the book covers to help kind of guide viewers to see from the outside in.
I have a question. So as far as your growth and how you sketch, can you expand a little bit on that, or is it just how you feel each day?
So the drawings, they are very reflective of just the experience of that day. And so sometimes they're more studious and patient and reflective of light and what I'm seeing. And sometimes they're more playful and or constructive, where I'm trying to imply some kind of order to what I'm doing by playing with shapes, in the most abstract terms. Yeah. So it's very much, dependent on the day, like a diary or journal.
Thank you, Erica. We will have our next artist talk upstairs. So if you like to take the stairs, there's a staircase on this side, and then I'm going to lead whoever